Maryland Deathfest was sick. It was so sick, in fact, that now I'm sick. Good evening, my name is Dante, and welcome back to my channel. On this channel, I discuss strange and obscure media. This past weekend, I went to Maryland Deathfest for the first time. It was an absolute blast, but I had bronchitis the entire time, and now I especially feel like shit. So if you're wondering why I look and sound like absolute death, that is why. I wanted to do a quick rapid fire video discussing the bands that I liked, but YouTube shorts are only 60 seconds long and there was no way in hell I was going to be able to cover that much in that short of a time frame. So I'll do it in a regular length video, but I'm gonna still keep it pretty concise because I feel like crap. Something I do want to go ahead and point out before we get started is that I am primarily a doom and sludge kind of guy. I love black and death metal, and I do enjoy some thrash. They just aren't necessarily my preferred genres. So majority of the bands I was most excited to see and enjoy the most are based a bit off of those preferences. Moving on though, let's just talk about the experience. My friends and I arrived there on Thursday evening. We were a little bit late because the traffic from DC to Baltimore was insane. The first band that I got to see were DERKETA, who performed at Ram's Head. I absolutely love old school 90s death doom, and I had been familiar with DERKETA since I was a teenager, so I knew that I was in for a good performance, and they provided that. The vocalist guitarist even said herself during the show that it was some of the best sound that they had ever had, so I'm glad that that got to be my live experience of them. As much as I hate to admit it, Thursday ended up being a pretty light evening for me. As I turned in early, I knew that if I wanted to survive the rest of the weekend, I was going to need to conserve as much energy as possible. I regret missing Sodom, but it just is what it is. ESOTERIC would have been the bigger draw for me that evening, but I had literally just seen them in Richmond just a couple days prior to Deathfest, so I felt okay with missing them. Day 2 was Friday, and perhaps my highlight of the fest entirely. It was more of a back-to-back kind of day for me. My first band of the day were Defeated Sanity, a tech death band from Germany and the US. I knew I had heard them before and liked them, but I didn't know them well enough to really name particular songs or albums. That being said, I'm really glad that I caught them, and I'm especially glad that I caught them early in the day. They were very energetic, very powerful, very rhythmic. I don't normally consider myself much of a drum guy. Like, when I listen to bands or see them perform, I'm not usually paying much attention to what the drums are doing. However, I was obsessed with their snare tone. Like, it was just super clean and punched me right in the face every time it hit. The next band that I saw were ARCTURUS, a black metal turned avant-garde metal band from Norway. I really didn't know what to expect from them. The only material of theirs I had really listened to prior were some of the earlier albums that featured Garm from Over on vocals. That being said, they were fantastic. They were very theatrical, they all had costumes on, most of the vocals were clean, there were a lot of keyboard parts. I was actually familiar with vocalist ICS Vortex from his old doom metal band Lamented Souls, which I love. I actually forgot that he sang in ARCTURUS until seeing them live. And holy shit, he is now one of my favorite vocalists. He has this crazy high-range operatic tenor voice that just sails over the rest of the music. His singing alone made ARCTURUS one of my favorite sets of the entire fest. The next highlight of the evening for me were AGALLOCH, a band from the US who combined folk, black, doom, and post-metal. I did not make it a secret that I was disappointed that My Dying Bride dropped. However, I do enjoy AGALLOCH, and they made a very worthy replacement. Their set consisted entirely of what I would consider to be their best songs. There were two things that I really enjoyed about their performance. The first being that John's vocals are way more intense live than they are on the recordings. On the albums, his scream is a little bit more of a like whispery, raspy type of vocal, whereas with this performance, he was really letting it out. My other favorite aspect of this performance is I could really detect the band's inspirations from gothic rock and post-punk in the guitar work, whereas I find it is often a lot more subtle on the recordings. One thing that I found to be a little bit of a downside is I thought the sound quality of the lead guitars was a little bit harsh or sharp in the mix. I don't necessarily think that was the band's fault. I think it's possible that whatever sound system they were working with just might not have complemented their sound as well as it did other bands. It was still a great performance that just took me out of the experience a little bit. Now, on to the highlight of day 2, and honestly, the entire fest for me. That band is AHAB, a funeral doom act from Germany. I love these guys. I have been into them since freshman year of high school. I think they are so talented and they put on such a great performance. Because their sound is very reverb heavy, I was unsure of how the clean vocals and lead guitars were going to translate live. However, aside from a couple of moments of feedback here and there, it pretty much sounded exactly the way that they do on the albums. I can say wholeheartedly that I was immersed in the experience and was so happy to finally get to see them. I just realized I've been forgetting to mention what stages the band's played at, but if you care that much, you can look at the set list. Day 3, we started off with AVULSED from Spain. Interestingly, this was actually the first time I had ever even heard of AVULSED, but a friend of mine wanted to check them out, so I was like, alright, what the hell, let's see it. When they first started, the guitars were a little bit lost in the mix, and so I almost lost interest. But once the sound guy cranked that shit up, it was on. They had such sick riffs, great energy. The vocalist put on such a good performance. Several times during the set, the vocalist would crowd surf and the security personnel had to hold up the mic cord so that it didn't strangle anybody. You could just sense how happy the members of the band were to be performing, and even though it was death metal, of course, it was pretty uplifting. Because I knew only a handful of doom metal bands were going to be performing at Maryland Deathfest, I made it a priority to go catch Dread Sovereign. This trio is a traditional doom act from Ireland featuring Alan Averill from Primordial on bass and vocals. Going into the performance, I just immediately felt like I was in my environment, my space, listening to the riffs that I enjoy the most. They just had a very classic, Sabbath-y, traditional sound with nice, hazy, punchy guitars, and Alan's voice is super powerful while also clean and epic sounding. If you could imagine like a more traditional sounding High on Fire, that would be the best way that I would sum up their performance. One band that I was really excited to see again were NIXIL, a black metal band from Maryland. I actually played with these folks in my former band a few years ago, and it was such a fun show. They're really nice folks and super freaking talented. Their take on black metal incorporates a good deal of progressive influence in the guitar work, but not overtly so. The fourth and final day, I went into it kind of like just chilling and like letting my friends kind of wander about because I knew I was going to have to save my energy for most of the evening. The first band that I was stoked to see were Primordial, a folk metal band from Ireland. Like I said about Dread Sovereign, the vocalist is Alan Averill, and he just stole the entire show. The riffs were super epic and had a lot of melody. Alan's voice is a powerful, gritty, high-range, clean voice that just sails over the rest of the music. Although they're very different musically from ARCTURUS, I felt that Primordial had a similar execution in their performance as far as the theatrics and the overall charisma of the vocalist went. I have to say, it killed me to do this, but I miss Cryptopsy's set. I genuinely wanted to see them, and I loved their early albums. But after Primordial had finished and I went straight to Cryptopsy, I saw that crowd and I said, hell f***ing no. So I went inside Ram's head and listened to SINMARA. So SINMARA are an Icelandic black metal band. I had heard of them because a friend's band had played with them a few years ago, but I didn't really know much about them beyond that. Out of all the bands that I saw at Deathfest, I actually think that SINMARA did the best at creating atmosphere. They just had this very mystical, icy, fluid-sounding guitar tone, which I realize seems to just be a trademark of Icelandic bands at this point. But their sound as a whole was just overall very haunting, cold, ghostly. It was overall just a nice little bit of variety from the more in-your-face bands that are more prevalent in the fest. Moving on, my second favorite band of the fest behind AHAB were GORGUTS. This is a tech death band from Canada and easily my favorite band in that particular niche of music. Their sound overall is very avant-garde, dissonant. It goes out of its way to mix melodies and rhythms together that are supposed to clash and sound ugly and creepy. The weirdest thing about this band for me is that I find their music oddly danceable. Like, you absolutely cannot headbang in rhythm to their music, but there is something so off-kilter about the rhythms that it just makes you want to just kind of groove around. The guitar playing has this weird quality about it that makes me think of like an orchestra or like someone trying to play like a violin or cello. I don't know for a fact that Luc Lemay is like classically trained at guitar, but I would be very surprised to find out that he isn't. Speaking of Luc Lemay, I think he is one of the most charismatic frontmen of any band ever. In his performances, you can just really sense his passion for extreme music and how much he loves playing it. Like, I couldn't help but just have a good time watching his set. The last major highlight for me on day 4 were Bloodbath. Bloodbath are an amazing death metal supergroup from Sweden who feature several members of bands that I love. I was a little bit disappointed to see that Jonas Rensk wasn't on bass this evening. However, I mean, Nick Holmes on vocals and Anders Nyström on guitar, I mean, that's perfect. They delivered true to form, classic Swedish death metal that packed a punch while also bringing in a nice bit of melodicism and doominess. It was a pretty straightforward and enjoyable set, though there was a good deal of feedback that kind of took me out of the experience. Aside from that, though, they put on a great show, and I'm really glad that I got a chance to see them. Even though my preferences lie more towards early Catatonia and Paradise Lost than they do towards Bloodbath, I appreciate the musicians enough to know that I'm going to have a good experience no matter what band they're playing in. Admittedly, by the end of Bloodbath's set, I was spent. I tried to catch a little bit of Mortuary Drape, but that was an indoor set, and going in there, it was so packed that you couldn't even get up the stairs. So at that point, I was like, you know, I've had a good time. My friends have been having a great time. I'm exhausted and I'm losing my voice. I think it's okay to just call it a night. Speaking of friends, as someone who lives on the East Coast, I was very grateful to run into a bunch of people I know in Virginia, in North Carolina, in Maryland, as well as some folks that I had been talking to online or been friends with for a minute but had never met in person. I got to meet Wyatt XM and his wife. He is one of my favorite YouTube creators. He has been super supportive of my channel. It was so awesome meeting them both. I got to meet Daniel and Cornelius from AHAB, which was so cool. I got a chance to tell Daniel that his music was a huge inspiration for me, which he was appreciative of. Lastly, someone who I had been wanting to meet for a very long time was Stuart Prickett. He is a musician in Australia who has played in a wide variety of bands. Just to name a few, he has played guitar and written songs in Stone Wings, The Slow Death, Illimitable Dolor. He's toured as a guitarist for Mournful Congregation. He and his wife were both super friendly, and he actually brought me a copy of The Slow Death's most recent album, Siege. Easily one of the nicest gestures that a musician has done for me. If you like atmospheric, emotional, depressing funeral doom like Shape of Despair, Evoken, stuff like that, then you really should check out this band. And on that note, let's talk about the music that I bought. As I'm sure some of you are aware by now, I am a CD kind of guy. As much as I love vinyl, I was not going to task myself with carrying around records at a hot, crowded metal festival. First we have St. Vitus's Die Healing, pretty self-explanatory, classic piece of traditional doom metal. Likewise, we have Warnings the Strength to Dream, a lesser known selection but also a fantastic traditional doom album. I'm realizing now that I don't have a copy of Watching from a Distance yet, and I don't know why that is. I need to change that. I snagged 2 albums from the band Funeral, the first being To Mourn is a Virtue, and the second being In Fields of Pestilent Grief. This is one of my all-time favorite bands. They are a doom metal band from Norway. Next we have Esoteric's Subconscious Dissolution into the Continuum, Funeral Doom from the UK. I missed these guys the night that they played at Deathfest, but like I said before, I saw them a few nights before that, and I had gotten a couple other albums of theirs, so I was like, alright, well, why not another? Next we have Worship's album Turanian Wake. I've spoken about them in a previous video. Classic funeral doom from Germany, very haunting, very bleak. Next we have Aldebaran, Dwellers in Twilight, very slow, droney sludge metal from the United States. Lastly, I got 3 of my favorite Rotting Christ albums, Non-Serbium, Triarchy of Lost Lovers, and A Dead Poem. These folks are a classic melodic black metal band from Greece, while the first 2 albums that I mentioned are pretty straightforward melodic sounding black metal. A Dead Poem was the album that saw them going in a little bit more of a gothic direction alongside Moonspell or Tiamat. So that wraps up my first Maryland Deathfest experience. I am absolutely exhausted and am surprised that my voice has been managing to keep up throughout this video. Keep your eye out for the next Not Safe for Life albums video. I'm predicting that'll be out in the next few days. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also support me by following me on Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Time for another dose.